we've got most of them here, and then as we go along, I'm sure more will start to pop in. But thank you all for joining us. We're really excited about this this webinar that we are hosting today. The topic for today is the first steps that newly appointed trustees should take. And we've been seeing a lot of it in the in Facebook groups, a lot of questions coming through. People, you get elected as a trustee and then what? So we're really excited to start chatting to people and to trustees about this, and give you some really valuable information that you can take away and use as your step-by-step guide for when you are elected. So I just want to introduce our speakers today. And if you've been on our previous webinars, you'll know Willie and Zerlinda already. But if you haven't, let me introduce them. So Willie Roos is the CEO of Strata. He's practiced as a property attorney for over 20 years. He's been involved in sectional title management for over 8 years. Willie started Strata in 2014 with the goal of assisting bodies corporates with their funding without catching them in a debt trap. And Strata strives to be a fair and equitable money provider for the sectional title industry. On to Zerlinda. So Zerlinda van der Merwe is the co-founder and director of TVDM Consultants. Zerlinda is a specialist community schemes consultant, where she offers the services of legal advice in the form of consultations and legal opinions, meetings and CSOS attendance, as well as governance, documentation review, and amendments. And she also offers the service of being professional trustee. So Zerlinda's background is that she is an owner and a resident in an HOA, as well as being an investor owner in a sectional title scheme, as well as being a previous managing agent and a practicing attorney. So Zerlinda lives and breathes community schemes living and absolutely loves it. So I'm going to hand over to Willie. He's going to start us off.
Good morning, guys. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks to my team. Thanks to Zerlinda. I just want to throw in a little bit of a advertisement in respect of next week's webinar that we're going to have. We're going to talk about prescription of sectional title levies. We see that there's some interest in that regard, and we also see that there's interest in respect of some other aspects regarding CSOS levies and so forth. So I will endeavor to go and look at the law and make sure that we can assist you guys as far as possible in that respect. And then have a chat about that. But let's start with today's webinar, and let's start with once a person is elected at an AGM. So people get elected at the AGM. In general, the AGM would require of the owners to determine how many people would be elected as trustees. Once that decision was made as to how many people were going to be elected, the AGM will then proceed and start with the election process. If there's not sufficient people that were nominated in respect of people standing for the position, then nominations can be taken from the floor, and people can then nominate people at that stage and have people then elected as trustees. You do not need to be an owner. I mean, Zerlinda is an example of that. She's a professional trustee where she acts in that capacity on various boards of trustees and advise them as to their legislative duties and functions and so forth, and make sure that they comply with their fiduciary duty as well. So the body corporate is a legal person, and as such, it needs hands and feet to act, and cannot do so on its own, and it needs physical functionaries to do so. And the trustees are those physical functionaries to do whatever is required. So in a company, we would see them as the board of directors or the trustees in a trust. And they have similar functions in that regard, although the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, specifically from Section 4, Section 3, 4, up to Section 7, deals with all those functions and duties that trustees need to perform. So the functions needs to be formed, as I said, in terms of the Act and also in terms of the rules. And just one thing that I see that there are some contradictions is that rules contradict the Act, and then one needs to apply the law and go and have a look what is more important, the Act or the rules, and a rule can never supersede an Act, and therefore the Act would then apply. But in general, one would look at the Act and the rules and all the other regulations, for example, CSOS regulations that are also issued in respect of the fiduciary duties and so forth in respect of trustees. So the owners are also entitled to restrict the trustees in respect of what they're allowed to do and not to do, how much money they can spend on a single item and so forth. And those powers then that they have as owners will then restrict the trustees, and they will not be able to act outside of that. If they do, then obviously they will be liable, or they can be held liable in respect of actions that they've taken in that regard. So the trustees are the executives and the administrative organ of the body corporate. So on the Facebook groups, we see a lot of people saying that they are our slaves, or they do what we tell them to do and so forth. It's not completely correct. Although the owners through the AGM does have all the powers and do then determine how the trustees should act and appoint the trustees and appoint auditors to check them on a financial basis. The trustees are the executives. They are the ones that make and must make the day-to-day decisions in respect of maintenance, in respect of the administrative tasks and so forth. They also are in a fiduciary relationship. So that means that they need to act in the best interest of the body corporate. I think Zerlinda is going to have a long chat about that. I can just quickly say that the fiduciary relationship requires them to always act not in accordance with their own best interest, but the best interest of the group of owners and the body corporate as a whole. And then there are some other duties in respect of the regulations of the community scheme ombud services, where they have to take reasonable steps to inform themselves, to educate themselves. They have to have reasonable information and advice about matters that they need to take decisions on. They should be reasonably should be at all meetings and attend those meetings and make decisions. So you can't just become a trustee and then go away, because then you're not fulfilling your fiduciary duty as well. You must exercise your independent opinion. So you must not just go with the flow and do whatever everybody else is saying merely because they are saying that. So you actually need to go and find out what the situation is, what the facts are, what the law is, and then make an informed decision in that regard. So those are the normal fiduciary duties that trustees have to fulfill, and owners need to ensure that that happens, and they do so by making their choice in respect of trustees on a yearly basis. So if a trustee does not act in that function, then one would re-elect other trustees. One obviously can also move to have a special general meeting set up in terms whereof new trustees can be elected and so forth. So there are various steps that owners can take where trustees are not acting in the best interest of the scheme as a whole and where they're acting in their own regard. Okay. I think we also need to discuss the powers and the duties of the managing agent. So the managing agents stand in a different relationship than those of the trustees. In law, we say they're standing in a relationship of master and servant. That also doesn't mean that they're your servant as a slave. But it means that they are in a contractual relationship with the body corporate and that they have to perform in accordance with that contract and have to do the duties entrusted to them in accordance with that contract, and they are then entitled to remuneration if they perform those duties. Obviously, if they're not performing in accordance with the contract, then they are in breach of that contract, and one can then move to have the contract terminated in accordance with the termination clause in that contract. Alternatively, if there's no termination clause, then in accordance with the Act, the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. So the managing agent gets appointed by the trustees in terms of Section 4. It's one of the duties of the body corporate, which then in terms of Section 7 is given to the trustees to fulfill. And in general, they would then appoint the managing agent, and they would work with the managing agent on a day-to-day basis in performing their administrative duties. For example, making sure that the levy statements go out, that the financials are done, that the managing agent collate all the invoices in respect of work that has been done, get quotations. Obviously, that is also something that we want the trustees to do as well, because you don't want the managing agent to take control of that process on its own, because you want to check that and make sure, because that's where the most of the money is spent on a monthly basis, and you want to make sure that it's spent and well spent in respect of the work. They will also assist with determining the scope of work in respect of tasks. Obviously, if they're not an expert on painting or whatever the task is that is at hand, then one would need to get an expert in to determine the scope of work and ensure that things are done in a proper fashion. They will also help with the letters, the minutes of the meetings, and so forth, and keep all those records available for the owners so that owners can have access to that. And if the scheme wants to move to another managing agent, that all that information can move to the new managing agent to ensure that one knows that the decisions that was made by the trustees were done correctly. The decisions made in respect of the owners or by the owners at the AGM is noted in minutes and so forth. They will also assist in an advisory capacity, because most managing agents has gone through some form of training and goes through training in general. Lots of them are part of organizations like NAMA, where they get proper training and where that is done on a monthly basis, and where they then also understand the law and their duties and functions, and they can advise in that capacity. So when one picks a managing agent, it is always important that you go and check out what they know, that you have discussions with them, that you make sure that they not only can do the administrative portion by sending out the financials and sending out the levy statements, but that they can actually assist the trustees with their legal obligations and understanding of the Act, understanding of the rules, and give them proper advice in that regard. They will also assist with other contractually agreed tasks, for example, the issuing of the levy clearance certificate. I think Mike Addison had a long discussion the other day about the risks involved for managing agents by issuing levy clearance certificates and why they need fidelity insurance in that respect. But that is something that is generally done by the managing agent in accordance with the contract, and the fee that the managing agent charges in respect of the issuing of that clearance certificate is payable by the body corporate, because that is contractually agreed to. Obviously, the body corporate can then determine how to apportion it to the owner's account. They also can assist with staff appointment. I know when I was still managing buildings many years back, I assisted in those interview processes, made sure that the person knows what he's doing, make sure that the person is suitable for the position that we applied or that he applied, and we appoint him in. We resolve the UIF, the tax issues, and so forth. And that was all contractually agreed in our agreement with the body corporate. So it is very important for managing agents, for trustees, to go and scrutinize that agreement with their managing agent and make sure that you know what the tasks are that they're going to fulfill in accordance with their agreement, in accordance with their master and servant agreement that they have with the body corporate. Because all too often in the Facebook groups, we see that people are complaining that the managing agent wants to charge extra for doing something, want to charge a different fee for doing that, although they are getting their monthly fee and so forth. And when one looks at that, you will see that most of those instances, those things are not falling within the normal task that the managing agent should fulfill. And they fall outside of that scope. And it is additional work, and therefore the managing agent would charge for that, because nobody's going to work for free. Nobody's going to do work and not get remunerated for that. Managing agents have staff. They need to pay their staff. They need to make sure that they are viable businesses as well. So one, as a trustee, have an obligation to go and read through that contract. You must make sure that you know what is in the contract, that you are aware what the managing agent must do and what the managing agent can do in terms of that contract. Okay. I think we're going to deal now with the powers and the roles of the chairperson. I think, Zerlinda, that's you dealing with that, eh?
I am, yes. Fantastic. So firstly, thank you very much, Willie and Daniela, for the opportunity, and thank you all 107 participants for taking part today. Very good turnout. Thank you very much for that. I've been looking at the questions popping up, and I can't wait to work with Willie to answer some of those. But firstly, I must apologize for my terrible, boring background. I'm the unfortunate recipient of a MacBook that doesn't allow me to have all sorts of lovely things behind me. So you'll just have to deal with my boring face, but I'll try to be quite creative in my expressions if that will help at all. So firstly, we're going to deal with the role of the chairperson. Now, very often in my experience, and I'm sure all of the managing agents and trustees online this morning can agree, that no one wants to put their hand up to be chairperson because they feel as though this is an extraordinary role that is going to get them in trouble more times than not, and the weight of the world is going to be resting on their shoulders, and that's not the case. The chairperson has no more or less powers or responsibilities than the rest of the trustees. You know, the only thing that the chairperson has that's above and beyond is a casting and deliberative vote in the event of a deadlock of votes, which is why we always recommend that the number of trustees is an odd number of trustees to ensure that that position is never placed on the chairperson. And then, of course, dealing with the chairing of meetings. But even then, the chairperson of the trustees doesn't have to be the chairperson of annual general meetings and special general meetings. Very often that function is delegated to the managing agent, the portfolio manager. And I know a lot of my portfolio manager clients who are probably online this morning will say, no, we don't chair meetings, we facilitate meetings, which is 100% fine as well. Basically, you're doing all the talking and all the explaining, and the chairperson is simply making sure that all of these functions that we're going to be chatting about is dealt with correctly, because the portfolio manager, unfortunately, cannot do it all. They do try, but very often they need a little bit of help and support as well. So the alternative chairperson, like I said, can be the managing agent. It could potentially be somebody else in the managing agent's offices, maybe a director or general manager, depending on the need for them to be present at the meeting. It can be one of the alternative trustees. It could even be somebody in the membership of the body corporates or the homeowners association. Somebody asked a question about, does this apply to homeowners associations as well? And although in these webinars, we tend to deal with body corporates simply because the Act is telling us what to do. Most of it applies to homeowners associations as well, obviously dependent on the Memorandum of Incorporation or the Constitution, as I've got noted there. But overarching, the common law of meetings deals with special general meetings and annual general meetings, as well as trustee or director meetings. Very often, an external person is brought on as the chairperson of the meeting, who could be an attorney, for example, or could be a consultant. It depends, obviously, on the nature of the meeting and, of course, how much fight one is going to be expecting at that meeting. Now, the chairperson, irrespective of who that is, needs to maintain order. So by maintaining order, it's making sure that the people are not screaming and shouting, that you don't have little conversations going on in the background, that one person speaks at a time, that people aren't interrupted. It's a very difficult job, and one can imagine that if you have to take minutes and answer questions at the same time, it gets a lot for one person to do. And then, of course, they have to make sure that the agenda of the meeting is followed and that no additional items are brought online for discussion or for voting unless it is possible to do so. And then, of course, that the scope of the discussions relate to a specific agenda item as well at the relevant time, and whether or not the meeting is the relevant place for such discussions. If the meeting turns into an absolute dog show, then of course the chairperson has the right to adjourn that meeting. Adjourning the meeting does not mean that it's going to take place 1 week later, same time, same place. That is only if there's no quorum, which means if the chairperson is going to adjourn the meeting, in other words, end it for the day or end it for the evening, then a fresh notice will need to be sent out for a new annual general meeting or special general meeting to deal with all the business or the remainder of the business, depending when that meeting had to be adjourned. Of course, the chairperson can adjourn the meeting for a few minutes, simply to maintain order, or for the fellow members to tell a naughty owner to sit down and keep quiet or leave. I've also been to meetings where it's given the security guard enough time to remove an owner or group of owners that are misbehaving in a meeting. So it all depends on what the circumstances require. Something that a fellow attorney taught me once when I went to a meeting and thought I was too big for my britches, and that is to make sure that as a chairperson, you don't give advice to your members. You have to guide your members, very similar to what a managing agent did, according to what Willie spoke about a couple of minutes ago, is you're not standing up at the podium or the pulpit and telling owners, this is what the law says and this is what you should be doing. You're simply guiding them in the right direction. And of course, in order to guide them, you have to know a thing or two, which we'll deal with in a minute or two. You also need to ensure compliance with the notice that went out. For an annual general meeting, 14 days notice. For a special general meeting, 30 days notice. You need to make sure that all those check boxes are ticked. And then, of course, you need to make sure that nobody tries to propose a motion or table a motion that cannot be voted on at that particular meeting because it was not included in the notice, for example. The other thing that you have to be sure of as a chairperson is that all the documentation of the body corporate that needs to be there is at the meeting venue or is made available. Of course, if we're not holding a meeting physically, it gets a little bit more difficult to ensure the documentation is available. And normally these are the rules. If you're a HOA, the Constitution or the Memorandum of Incorporation and the estate rules. And then, of course, things like sectional plans and any document that you would need for the purpose of the agenda. So the financial statements, for example, or quotes for any project, or perhaps quotes for a change in auditors. Any document that you would need to have sent out with the pack would need to be available at the meeting as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that as a managing agent or as the committee, you have to have printed out, 100, 200, 300 packs. Of course, for an AGM, that gets emailed to everybody. For a special general meeting with special business, that gets emailed and sent via registered mail or hand delivery. So no need to make 110 copies to take with to a meeting. Procedure is very important. So from a chairperson's perspective, the common law of meetings comes in pretty handy, and Professor Paddock has a lovely common law of meetings handbook that's available that I still take with to every single one of my meetings, that teaches you how to deal with procedure at a meeting. That a motion has to be tabled, in sectional title it no longer needs to be seconded, that when minutes are going to be prepared, it needs to reflect the decisions and the outcome of decisions. So things about procedure are very important, because at the end of the day, the meeting is formal. And then, of course, the chairperson has to be impartial, which is very difficult sometimes when the chairperson is one of the trustees, one of the owners. It's very difficult sometimes to take the hat off as an owner or as a trustee when you're dealing with issues, but one needs to ensure impartiality to ensure a successful meeting. Can we pop over to the next slide? All right. So this is, we mentioned it briefly in the previous slide, the importance of a particular set of skills or knowledge when it comes to trustees. There is no requirement to be a certain type of trustee. There was a question in the group earlier about, what is required? Do you need a credit check or a police clearance? If you have to worry about a credit check or police clearance, I don't think that that would qualify you to be a trustee in the first instance. There is levels of disqualification in terms of the Act. Obviously, you can't be naughty and have stolen money and have been convicted of an offence somewhere else. So those are the types of things that you need to look at. And interestingly, under the Sectional Titles Act, you couldn't be in arrears with your levies or in breach of the rules of the body corporate, but under the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, that doesn't apply necessarily. In a negotiation, of course, it depends what the Constitution of the corporation says. Sometimes you have to be a member of the body corporate or the HA rather, and other times you don't have to be. So from a skill set and knowledge perspective, it's very important to have a look at it from a scheme to scheme basis. What does this particular scheme need? Are they going through a big project at the moment where they need somebody with an architectural background or an engineering background? Are they dealing with a whole bunch of CSOS disputes? Are they needing somebody that is good in dispute resolution or an attorney perhaps? It all depends on what the scheme needs at a certain point in time. Obviously, you know, the things that come across most often is finance. So it's always good to have somebody that understands how budgets and audited financial statements work. Of course, if you do have a managing agent, it's slightly easier to not necessarily have a specific skill set, but still very important for yourself as a trustee and of course for the members of the body corporate. The body corporate, or the homeowners association, can also have portfolios, and very often this will help you determine how many trustees you should have, and then of course the important items of business that you should be attending to on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And portfolios can range from a finance committee to a legal and governance committee to a maintenance committee to a landscaping committee to a marketing or social committee. It all depends what the scheme needs. And of course, you don't have to be a trustee to be involved in the management and the administration of the body corporates or the HOA. You can be a member of a subcommittee. And very often when a scheme is going through the process of a project, having a subcommittee is a good idea. I was recently at an annual general meeting where just too many people wanted to be trustees. And unfortunately, they couldn't have as many trustees. But people had such an interest in taking part that we recommended subcommittees being formed. And now they're dealing with what is important in the scheme for that point of time, and of course having a subcommittee. They don't make decisions, but they assist the trustees in coming to decisions and giving them information. And of course, you need to look at what you as an individual can bring to the table. So, you know, do you have a legal background, or do you have a financial background, or do you have a lot of time on your hands? Do you live at the scheme? Do you live close to the scheme? You know, are you a managing agent yourself at different schemes? What skill sets can you bring to the body corporate to identify how you'll be useful and if you'll be useful to them at a particular point in time? The Community Scheme Ombuds Service Act, the regulations provide that you have to be informed and educated. That doesn't mean that you need to do every single sectional title HOA course available to you, but you most certainly must know a thing or two. Gone are the days of saying, we're not a managing agent or we're not an attorney, we don't need to know that. Unfortunately, you do have to have a certain level of education and knowledge. And of course, the body corporate is entitled to add that to the budget, and any form of education or advice or guidance can be included in the budget, that the trustees don't have to pay for it out of their own pockets. If a decision needs to be made and they don't have the skill set or knowledge, or they aren't able to make a decision without assistance, of course, they can go and get that information. They can go and get that advice, whether it be financial or legal or any type of project-based information. Any specialist would be able to assist them. And of course, the cost must be provided for in the budget. And then what I believe is probably the most important responsibility of a scheme executive or a trustee or director is to exercise an active and independent opinion. I don't know how many of you have gone to meetings or on trustee committees or boards of directors where you look at a particular trustee to make a decision and you simply go with the flow. It's very important that you have your own opinion and you exercise your own opinion when it comes to decision making, taking of resolutions, because at the end of the day, if the proverbial hits the fan, you are going to be held responsible and accountable as everybody else would be. You can't say the chairperson made me do it, or I simply followed what the chairperson had to say. I don't know if I've got another slide. There we go. Conflict of interest is also a very big one. So under the Sectional Titles Act, you simply couldn't sign a contract where you had an interest. Now, under the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, if there is an indirect or a direct interest, I wrote there, smoke versus fire. So literally, if there's even a hint of being a situation of conflict of interest, that particular trustee cannot participate in a trustee meeting, and they cannot participate in the discussions surrounding a particular item where they have an interest, if it had to be done by a round robin, for example, over email. And then, of course, they cannot be part of the decision-making process, and they cannot sign any of the resolutions or contracts or give any of those instructions that flow from those resolutions or contracts. So when a trustee has an interest in a matter and it needs to go to the members for decision, if that trustee is a member, they can partake in the discussions and they can partake as a vote. If they're the chairperson, they cannot chair the meeting and give their opinion on a matter or indicate how they intend to vote on a particular item. So it's very important to distinguish between participation as a trustee versus participation as a member when it comes to conflict of interest. The conflict of interest scenario can become quite interesting when you are potentially causing the trustee committee to not have a quorum. In other words, when a matter has so many trustees involved in it from a conflict of interest perspective that the remaining trustees are not involved are not sufficient to deal with a quorum. And of course, a quorum is the majority of the trustees and a minimum of 2. And then if you obviously have sufficient number of trustees, then those 2 can only make interim decisions. That means that if there isn't a quorum, you would have to go to the members for decisions. That being said, what I always recommend in a body corporate or a homeowners association, if the constitutional memorandum allows it, is that you appoint alternate trustees when you are aware that the body corporate is going to be doing things or making decisions where a lot of the trustees or majority of the trustees are going to be having an interest in the matter and would need to be recused. Having an alternate trustee to step in that doesn't have that interest at least allows you to still continue business as usual. A question I very often get is, can a trustee be a contractor to the body corporate? Yes, they can be, but of course, the decision in regard to appointing their company, signing a contract and paying their bills, that particular trustee can't be involved in. Daniela, do I have another one? I do. So the next is the delegation of responsibility. Willie did say I'll be talking for a long time, so I'm trying to do it as quickly as I possibly can. Willie did touch on this in the beginning when he spoke about the appointment of a managing agent, but the trustees don't have to do everything themselves. And in most instances, at least in managed schemes, I find that the trustees probably don't do very much. It all depends committee to committee, and of course the composition of the committee, how much time they have, how much skill set they have. I like to think of trustees as the executive arm of the body corporate, which means they really don't have to be doing the nitty-gritty. They don't have to be available 24 hours a day to their members. Their personal email addresses and telephone numbers don't have to be made available, provided, of course, that there is a channel of communication, a managing agent or a building manager or whatever it might be. So some of the people that you would delegate your functions to, not your responsibility, but your functions, is the managing agent, an independent chairperson, as we mentioned, a professional trustee, like Willie mentioned, an executive managing agent. Now, very important, and I'm going to touch on this again, is that you can delegate the function, but you can't delegate the responsibility, which means if any of these parties that the function is delegated to messes up, you as trustees are still responsible. The trustees can never, ever give away that responsibility. So it's not a simple matter of, so-and-so's got it, I'm not going to be involved in it anymore. You very much have to still have your finger on the pulse as to what is going on with the administration and management of your scheme. There was a question about the role of the managing agent under the POPI legislation, for example. So in my opinion, and I'll say this to every single trustee and managing agent that I work with, is that the information officer under POPI should be a trustee, potentially even the chairperson, but should not be the managing agent. The managing agent, for example, could be the deputy information officer, because the function of complying with POPI can be delegated to the managing agent, but the responsibility rests with the body corporate, and the body corporate is the one, well, the trustees are the ones that exercise those functions on behalf of the body corporate. So hopefully that answers that question. Some of the things that managing agents can do without trustees is signing of the levy clearance certificates, which Willie mentioned earlier on. That's basically the only document that a managing agent can sign without trustees being aware of it or involved in that process. But of course, that function rather must be delegated to the managing agent, perhaps in a management agreement or by trustee resolution. The managing agent can sign contracts with one trustee. And of course, that managing agent, that contract can't be the managing agent's contract, for example, that would need to be signed by two trustees. The function can be delegated to subcommittees or portfolios, like we spoke about earlier. And of course, the functions of the trustees are very much restricted by the restrictions given by the members at the annual general meeting, or additional functions and powers are given by directives that are given by the members at the annual general meeting. And then, of course, when it comes to delegation of functions, something that we deal with very often in our rule amendments is where the body corporate wants to make an owner or group of owners responsible for maintenance and repair of portions of common property or exclusive use areas. The responsibility cannot be delegated, but the function can be delegated, and that can be done in terms of the rules. And that's just a bit of an interesting one, food for thought. I think I should be done now. There we go, I'm done.
Before I go into the steps that the trustees must take once they've been nominated, I've also had a look at some of the questions, and there are some very interesting questions here. One of the questions is, what if the opposite is true, where you can't get trustees that are willing to stand up? Because you do get that quite often as well, especially in schemes where things are not going too well. People don't want to take that responsibility and are not prepared to then stand. So the Act now gives the opportunity for an executive managing agent to then be appointed that will then be able to manage the scheme in accordance with the Act. And the further alternative is to have an administrator appointed. And obviously that is the last thing that one would want to do, but that is the last step that you can take to try and resurrect or make sure that this body corporate is still functioning. And the court will then appoint somebody in terms of Section 16 of the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. And in that order, it will specifically say what is required of this person, and he or she will then fulfill those duties, report to CSOS, and then the order is normally for a period of time, and within that period of time he has to rehabilitate the scheme and get things running and get a committee that is working, and obviously at the end then get somebody appointed. So that is your alternative where somebody does not want to stand or you can't get people to stand. Just in respect of POPIA, we are going to have a webinar on that. We will have somebody from Schuler Heerschop Pienaar that will have a whole discussion. I think Rudy or Dylan Heerschop will do that for us. They have done the NAMA ones as well, so we will definitely have them to do that one with us as well. So we are going to get you some more information on POPIA as well. There was another interesting question. I think it pertained also to the situation where trustees are unwilling to act against delinquent owners because they were voted in by these delinquent owners. Now, obviously, in terms of the old Act, when somebody was in arrears or in perpetual breach of the rules, one could have them exclude from a meeting and then get the proper people appointed as trustees to make sure that these delinquent owners do not rule the scheme. That has changed in terms of the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, and only when you now have an order, a court order or a CSOS order, can you now exclude these people from the meeting. And if the trustees have been delinquent in their tasks as trustees, then obviously there won't be orders and these people will be part of that meeting. The only thing that an owner can do under those circumstances, or I would think, I don't know, Zerlinda, maybe you've got other alternatives, but what we have dealt with in the inner cities of Joburg, of Cape Town, of Durban, is where an administrator is then appointed by an owner. Because if the trustees are not prepared to act against these people, and we've seen where they actually actively go and write off their debt and say, now we don't owe the body corporate and they owe the city of Joburg or Durban millions of rands. I mean, we've got one building that owes 19 million rand in respect of area, electricity and water and sewer charges, and the trustees are not prepared to act, they're not prepared to collect the outstanding levies, then you need to have somebody appointed by a court to make sure that the scheme is resurrected. There's no other way, I would think. Zerlinda, have you got other alternatives?
I definitely agree with you about the administrator, and of course the alternative is the appointment of an executive managing agent that steps into the shoes of the trustees. But of course there needs to be the money for that, and there needs to be a member resolution for that, and that very often isn't the case in this type
Correct.
of delinquent situation that you set out. So there the only option is administration, unfortunately.
Yeah, that would be the only option for a scheme like that. I think it was Pat that asked that question. So Pat, you will have to get one or two members that are then prepared to go to court and request the court to assist. All right, in respect of what trustees need to do once they've been elected, you've now attended this AGM, you have been elected, what next? Obviously, after that first meeting, that set of trustees need to get together and they need to make an arrangement for the first meeting that takes place. And that first meeting need to be set up with all the appointed people. And at that first meeting, they will appoint a chairman. So that will be your first task as a new board of trustees, is to appoint a chairman. Zerlinda has also said that you can appoint other committees and other functions. In schemes where I have managed, we have always elected a treasurer to make sure that there's somebody that is responsible for the finances, that checks the bank statements, make sure that things are done correctly, release payments in respect of payments that were loaded onto systems and so forth. Appoint a secretary that makes sure that the minutes are kept, that statutory obligations are fulfilled, and that things are done in accordance with the Act. And then obviously also the different portfolios, like Zerlinda said, maintenance, security, rules. We've dealt, in schemes, we've broken them up in blocks and have a trustee responsible for a specific block where people then have a channel where they can report to that person if there's a problem. So there's various committees that one can set up. There was a question about committees. Those committees are actually just on an advisory basis. So they don't make the decisions. At the end of the day, it is still the trustees that make the decision. That committee will come and advise the trustees as to the course of action that needs to be taken. And the trustees will then make the decision in that respect. What is of utmost importance is that the new trustees must take control of the bank account. They must ensure that they are the signatories on that account. All too often, we see that the managing agent and trustees of 5 years ago are still the signatories on bank accounts. And if the proverbial hits the fan, then you cannot change the bank account because you're not signatories. Those people are not prepared to now sign at this stage because there's a fight in the scheme. So one of the most important things for trustees to do when they are elected is make sure that the signatories on the bank account is changed while you still have the cooperation and participation of the previous trustees. Obviously, there are different ways how this bank account can be handled. If the managing agent is an estate agent and it is run through the trust account, then the trustees won't be signatories because this will be a trust account and the managing agent will have full control over that account. Alternatively, it will be an account open in the name of the body corporate where you then need signatories. And in practice, what we have done is we have set that up that the managing agent can load, for example, payments, but can never release a payment. And that payment must be released by the treasurer or the chairman or one of the trustees that are then authorized in terms of a resolution of the board of trustees to do so. In that way, you have control over the bank account and you know that no money is paid out of your account without you knowing it and without you giving the approval in that respect. The next step that you as trustees must take is to choose your domicilium. That is the address where you accept service of process in respect of any process and legal action. That also gets done seldomly, and we still sometimes find the managing agent that were 3 managing agents backs address as the domicilium, and you would then never know if legal action is taken against the body corporate, and it creates a problem that you have to rescind the judgment, or you need to go and fight something that is already a fait accompli, and it creates a problem. So choose your domicilium, give notice to CISOS in that regard, change the address, make sure that you have that sorted out. Then the next important step, and I think that is the most important step, I would think, is to raise levies, because if there's no finance, the body corporate can't function. So you need to raise the levies in accordance with the budget that was approved by the owners. And you need to give notice to the owners. We now in court find that most courts are now requiring the Regulation 25 notice, where owners were given notice that the levy was changed. And if we can't do that, then we have a problem in getting judgments against debtors. So make sure that the managing agent, after the levies were raised, after the resolution was taken by the trustees to raise it in accordance with the budget that was approved, to send out the notice to all owners to notify them of the increased levy. Next important step is for the trustees to determine the interest rate. I mean, we've last time spoken about the credit policy. We've given you a draft credit policy that can be used and can be changed to suit your purpose. But it's important that the trustees make a decision in respect of what interest will be payable in respect of the arrears, and notice be given to owners that this will be charged and that they are aware. In general, we find that body corporates charge 2% per month. That's the norm nowadays. It says in the regulation or in the rules that it should not exceed the maximum as per the Credit Act. We don't know which portion of the Credit Act it refers to, but I think CISOS have made a ruling where they say that it is in respect of incidental credit, and incidental credit, the maximum is 2% per month. So that is now the norm that is being applied, or what we see as the norm that is currently being applied in respect of arrears. The next step that you as new trustees need to do is to review your maintenance plan. Make sure that your maintenance plan is still in order, that there's not something else that becomes important and that you need to do or have become important and have changed the priorities. Look at that plan, go through it, and make sure that it's done properly. In respect of that maintenance plan, look at your contractors, get a list of approved contractors, make sure that these contractors are people that are not going to, and we've seen that a lot as well, where bodies corporate take the lowest quote, and this quote is so low that one would actually know that this person is never going to fulfill his task. Don't go for that. Do the right thing. Appoint somebody that you know is going to do the job and make sure that it is done properly. We have a service level agreement that we will make available to you guys, that you can sign with one of these contractors or with your panel of contractors to ensure that there is a contract, there is a written contract between the body corporate and the trustees acting on their behalf and the contractor. Multiple quotes. It's important that trustees get multiple quotes in conjunction with the managing agent. Don't leave it all in the hands of the managing agent as well. It is not their task unless contractually agreed to. It is your task to get quotations of work to be done. But assist them. You also get quotes, make sure that you have that, and make sure that you compare them and look at the scope of work that needs to be complied with, and make sure that the people have quoted for the same thing. Compare apples to apples and make sure that you then choose the right one. You need to review all your contracts. You need to review your contracts with all your service providers. The trustees can appoint various service providers in terms of Section 4 of the Act. So obviously one of those is the managing agent. Go through it. There's a big discussion currently on the group ongoing if a managing agent needs to be registered with the EAAB or not. There are different points of view, and some people think that they should not be registered, or they don't have to be registered, and only need to be registered when they deal with the trust money or monies of the body corporate. If they don't have control over the money, then you don't have to be registered. I'm aware of a ruling of CISOS in Durban, where they've actually now ruled that even if you don't have control over the money, then you need to be registered with the EAAB. I think in terms of the Property Practitioners Act, that problem is going, or that question is going to become a moot question, and people will have to be registered with the EAAB. So if you're not, and you are a managing agent, move towards that. Get yourself registered. I think at the end of the day, that will be the prudent thing and the more clever thing to do. Check if your managing agent is registered with an organization like NAMA, obviously, that have some benefits, and as such, it is good to make sure that they have the training and have the knowledge and skills. Check your service contractors in respect of security. Check the service levels that needs to be provided, and so forth. Go through all these contracts and make sure that they comply with what you want them to comply with. Okay. The next step that you need to do is you need to look at your insurance policies. The Act requires that the building must be insured at the replacement value. It places a huge burden on body corporates with building costs that goes up and up on a daily basis. And on a 3-year basis, there has to be a valuation done to make sure that the insurance is correctly, or the building is correctly insured. So go through that, insure your building to the correct value, and make sure that those insurance policies are in place and paid. Also have a look at the Fidelity Fund insurance. I think we will have a chat at some stage with Mike as well, Mike Addison from Adsure, and he can have a long discussion on Fidelity insurance for the trustees, and Fidelity insurance for managing agents in that respect as well. So make sure that those policies are in place to ensure that if something happens, that you are covered by your policy. Then step 10, phone Zerlinda, to review your management and conduct rules. I think she would love to. She's busy looking at some conduct rules for us at the moment in one of the buildings where we assisted. So have a look at your rules. Make sure that your rules still comply with what you want to achieve in that complex. I've seen a ruling last night about Airbnb, where the court found that the Airbnb could not be allowed, and the person could not do the short-term rentals based on the rules. In that instant, the court, the body corporate changed their rules and excluded that, and the court found in their favor. I know that that decision is on appeal, but as it stands at the moment, the court found in favor of the body corporate and in accordance with their rules. So check your conduct rules, make sure that they are in order, make sure that they are the best rules that you possibly can have at this stage. Thanks. Right, then you have an obligation as trustees to supply all occupants with a copy of the rules. So that is the owners and the tenants. So make sure that that goes out. We have in the past had the owners sign for it, because if you want to enforce your rules, you want to make sure that people know what the rules are, and you don't want to have a situation where people say, well, I didn't know that that was the rule. So that is why the Act requires trustees to have this available and make it available to all occupants of the scheme. So get that out there. Then your next step is to set up your monthly trustees meetings, discuss that with the managing agent, what you require. Your managing agent will supply you with a financial pact. I think that most managing agents do that these days, where you have your levy roll, where you have your income statement, where you have your expenditure, you have your invoices, and it all ties up together so that you can, as a board of trustees, check this on a monthly basis and make sure that these things are properly done, because that is your obligation as a person that was elected with a fiduciary duty towards the collective. Right, trustees' resolutions to the managing agent to load payments. So we required when we were managing buildings that the trustees give us resolutions for every payment that we should load. We would not even load a payment onto the system unless the trustees has authorized those to make sure that we would not later be accused of making payments that were not allowed. So make sure that you get those resolutions out to the managing agent that tells them what they should load and what they should release. Get the treasurer or the chairperson to release those payments. Also make sure that you have those resolutions in place where those payments were authorized. Okay, on a monthly basis, you need to discuss your outstanding levies. You need to go through your credit policy. You need to make sure that you take action against those owners that are in arrears, that are delinquent, that are not doing what they're supposed to do in terms of the act. So take your action, be it through CSOS, be it through an attorney, be it through a different way that you want to do by discussion and so forth. But go and have those discussions. And do that with the owners and so forth. Bank statements, it's important that the trustees on a monthly basis get the bank statements, scrutinize those statements, make sure that your bank is in order, and that is in respect of your investment account as well as your administrative account. Make sure that you see those, that you know that your investment is invested at the best possible rate, but that you do have access to that money still. So go through those, make sure that those are in order. Another important thing to do is to set up a communications platform with the owners. In most complexes, we see that we have a WhatsApp group. I call it a bitch basis or bitch center. Sometimes it just becomes a fighting platform. And I would, as trustees, make sure that we are the people that set it up in an anonymous way, that people don't necessarily have access to all the numbers, and that people can be communicated, but that they can't necessarily communicate back unless it is authorized by an admin on that group. So that then stops this continuous bickering on the group, which can have a complete negative effect on a complex, which is actually running fairly well. And then if everybody starts moaning and groaning on this WhatsApp group, then everybody starts getting negative. So have control of that platform. Make sure that you don't put owners' details on there. I said the Poppy Act. I mean, we will have that discussion when we get somebody to have that discussion from Schuler Heerschop, and we will then discuss that. Okay, authorized communications, as I said as well. Okay, then when you start getting to the end of your term, then you need to start budgeting for the next financial year. So you need to draft a proper budget that you're going to do in conjunction with your managing agent. We've also given you guys a free tool last time that we had a webinar. If you haven't received it, then you can pop Daniela an email and she will send it through to you. Make sure that the financials are prepared by the auditors as were elected by the general body. We had a long discussion in the office about that. It is one of the mechanisms where owners check what the trustees are doing, and that is the appointment of independent auditors. Don't necessarily use the auditors that are recommended by the managing agents. As owners, choose a auditor that represents you as owners, that can then have an audit function, make sure that things were done correctly, check the audit report, make sure that you know what the audit says when that audit comes in, or the financials come in front of the AGM for discussion. So the trustees need to prepare those financials, work with the auditors, get everything to the auditors so that the proper audited statements can be prepared. Okay, the AGM pack must be prepared with the chairman's report, or the trustees report that says what the functions were that they performed, what the decisions were that they made throughout the year, and so forth. So that needs to be prepared as well, and that needs to go out to all owners as part of your AGM pack. Then sent out the notices, 14 days notice, as Zerlinda said, in respect of an annual general meeting, 30 days notice in respect of a special meeting. We will give you guys a draft notice as well that has all the points in that is required by the Act. So if you pop us a mail, we'll send that through to you as well. Okay, and then prepare the attendance register so that you can make sure that there's a quorum, get your voting cards ready, get yourself ready for this. I mean, obviously your managing agent will assist with this. This is what they are doing. They know what they're doing in that respect, and get them to assist you with that. Right, then you're going to have your AGM. Zerlinda explained to you guys who the chairman will be and who a chairman can be. So determine who the chairman of that meeting will be. And then there was a couple of things that I just wanted to say as well. In respect of the chairman, the impartiality of the chairman, and Zerlinda's absolutely correct. Once a chairman steps into the ring and wants to give his opinion in respect of something, at that moment he's actually required to then give over the chairmanship at that stage to somebody else for him to actually take part and voice his opinion in respect of stuff, because he is not impartial at that moment anymore, and he's giving his views, his partial point of view. So at that stage, it's necessary for him then to rather give it to somebody else, and that is why it's generally a better idea to get the managing agent involved in that respect, so that they can chair that meeting. Then we had a question of how many trustees should be appointed. That is a question that should be answered by every body corporate on their own. They should determine. Some schemes are small and they only require 2 or 3 people. Some schemes are very large and they require 15 people and 10 people to be on that board. So that is a question that needs to be decided at the AGM. So owners vote on the amount of trustees that needs to be elected. Zerlinda is absolutely correct. It's always better to have an uneven number so that you don't need a chairman to have a casting vote, so that there's always a unequal amount of votes. In body corporates where I was involved, if we had an equal amount, or we couldn't come to a decision in respect of a specific decision that needed to be taken, we advised that the chairman should not take that casting vote, and that they should rather go to the owners and get the owners, because it's then clear that we're sitting with a 50-50 situation, and it's generally better than to get owners' opinion in this regard as well, or committees' opinion in this regard, and then make that decision and see if you can't get to a majority vote. But in terms of the Act, the chairman does have that casting vote, and if he wants to utilize it, then there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, then once that has happened and trustees were elected, then we start the whole process from scratch again, and they start doing the same thing again, electing a chairman and so forth. Okay, so I hope that gives you guys some idea of what you need to do. There are some free resources, and if you get into contact with us, we will send that through to you guys. Just a bit about StrataFin. Somebody must pay for the bills, and I think StrataFin is, so now I need to advertise them. StrataFin assists body corporates with finance. We try and do it in a way that is not the normal model, where where we don't catch the body corporate in a debt trap. So our product is built in such a way as to give the body corporate cash flow without monthly repayments by the body corporate to StrataFin. And it is also not dependent on us collecting the money. Your loan will not be dependent on us collecting the money, and you will not keep on paying interest until such a time as that has been collected. So our model is completely different. If you are interested, and we've seen that one question in respect of the delinquent building stuff that we really get involved in and where we really can assist, get in contact with us and we can try and assist you guys in that regard. Zerlinda.
Oopsie, sorry, I muted myself. We did mention right at the beginning how we can assist you as TVDM. You know, a couple of the questions were quite relevant and pertinent to what we're currently doing right now. We're assisting managing agents and trustees with COVID compliance, if that's still a thing in your schemes that haven't been dealt with. And then, of course, with Poppy and Pyre, doing all of those manuals for the deadline coming in on the 30th of June. So that's keeping us quite busy. And then, of course, we're entering into meeting season as well, and especially a lot of body corporates and HAs are dealing with meetings that they didn't run during the course of 2020, sometimes 2019 as well. So we offer that service of attending a meeting, assisting the managing agent, assisting the trustees, chairing the meeting if necessary, and then of usual boring attorney stuff about legal advice and consulting and all those. And then, of course, quite a passion of ours is working on conduct rule and management rule amendments. And of course, along with that, memorandums of incorporation and constitutions as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then
I
we
see
will
we've
also
run. Yeah, sorry, Willie, carry on.
No problem. Now, I just wanted to say we're going to see you guys next week as well in respect of the prescription discussion that we will have, and we hope that we're giving you some good advice.
I see there's a couple of questions that have come in, and I'm very cognizant of the time. We don't want to keep you here for too much longer. So what we'll do is we will take those questions and put them in the email that we sent through to you afterwards. We'll answer those in the email. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and we really appreciate Zerlinda for being here and for collaborating with us on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You too.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.